Hello and well met. This is Founder Leroon, and I'm here with Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to go over some things that you may want to know about Fantasy Grounds and also how to get it started, maybe even how to set it up. It just depends on what your needs are. So first things first, I'm at the launch screen. At this point, if you are not already in an existing campaign or you don't already have something going, it's your first kind of go around, you want to create a new campaign. And for this particular session, I'm calling it Using Fantasy Grounds for RPGs. You select your rule set. So in this case, I will pick the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. But as you can see, there's a ton of other rule sets that are supported. So you have Pathfinder 2, Savage Worlds. You even have the new Pathfinder for Savage Worlds, Starfinder, Vampire. So there's also Alien. So there's a lot of supported rule sets. There's even a few on here that are not showing. So if you want to set a password at this point, you can, and then you can set your chat name. So I might put DM whoever. In this case, I'll put my moniker as Laren. And then if you, like I said, you can put a password here. If you don't want to share your game on the cloud, you can just set to LAN, which is local area network. So once you set your rule set, then it will ask you for these things. So I'm going to set it to LAN, so it's private basically. And then you can load up any of your themes, or perhaps you have some extensions. So the only theme that I'll load in this case is I'm going to load the Wizard's Desk. This is a paid theme. It doesn't come with it, so maybe I won't. But I'll just leave it generic and vanilla. The only other third-party thing I might use for extensions, is what I mean by thing, is the fonts. So there's this font, this is Roboto Fantasy Grounds Unity. You can find this on the Fantasy Grounds forums for free, or you can find it potentially on the Forge, which is another way to subscribe to third-party content that's created by the community. So that's on the updater. When you subscribe in the Forge on the website, it will update automatically with your regular updates. And if you buy content, you want to update Fantasy Grounds, so it pulls the content in. And I'm assuming that you're already registered and that you already have your copy of Fantasy Grounds updated and such. So that's what you do first, is you make a new session, pick your rule set up your credentials if you have any, load any potential extensions. I'm only going to use the font extension, which is third party. It doesn't come with Fantasy Grounds. And then if you have any themes that you want to use, there's some that are free that come with, but the Wizard's Desk, the one I was going to use, is a paid theme, so I'll avoid using that. So I'm going to hit start. It'll take it a few seconds to load up. So probably, like for me, it's like 30 seconds because I have a ton of content. So if you want to reduce your load time, you want to keep your content to a minimum, it has to course through all of the different iterations of your third-party content, like maps and images and tokens, third-party modules, that sort of thing. It checks all the files before it loads. It has to basically take an inventory of what you have. And if you've added or taken anything away, it has to take that into account. So it's taking mine, almost a minute to load because I have a lot of content. But if you don't have as much content as I do, it shouldn't take quite as long. So the load time is something that you want to keep in consideration as you get further into Fantasy Grounds and get further down the line, is you want to make sure you don't have an overabundance of content like I do. I got to go through all of my folders and figure out what I actually need, and the modules that I need that are from the past that need to be updated, because there's a few minor errors with those because of the way fonts are handled, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're getting into Fantasy Grounds down the road. As your campaign builds, all your content grows, and also as your familiarity gets to the point where you're comfortable using Fantasy Grounds, you're going to want to go out and get a bunch of tokens and maps and stuff. So that's potentially something that you want to be very careful with. And I have years worth of content. So anyhow, so here's the load screen. You'll be faced with this campaign setup, which is kind of a new feature. They introduced this about a year and a half ago. What it does is it gives you a short way to get things started. So this first screen is the campaign setup window. That just allows you to have direct links straight to the user manual, wiki guide, and forums. And you notice the show on load is checked. So if you don't want this to come up again next time you come to this session, you click that little bubble there, and that will get rid of this pop-up when next time you sign in. And then you're going to hit next. So you can hit whatever rule sets you want. So you can do the SRD if you don't own anything yet. Core rules would be like the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. All rules would be anything official from the 5th edition rule set. I don't recommend that, at least not initially. It could potentially hang your system, especially if people are connected. 5e basic rules. So the SRD and the basic rules come with the 5th edition rule set. So I'm just going to hit the core rules. Once I click that, it's going to look through my library, and it's going to pull those up, and there'll be a confirmation window that pops up here shortly. So again, it's coursing through my library of purchased content. So this is official content that's embedded in Fantasy Grounds as a data file. So all that stuff's encrypted, but it basically all those are stored in the vault in the back folder of Fantasy Grounds. And if you ever have a corrupt download or something that didn't work out right, you can delete what's in the vault. It's not going to harm your campaign, and it will re-download it and hopefully replace and fix any of your corrupted data files. It does happen occasionally, like your computer might crash or have a hiccup while it's in the middle of updating. So if that happens, you just go in your vault and you either delete the offending rule set or just delete the whole folder and just re-update. Now, if you have a lot of content, that might take you about 30 minutes to do all that, but nonetheless, that's one of the troubleshooting tips if you have problems with the downloads. Sometimes your antivirus might block the downloads too, or you might have a firewall issue. But nonetheless, that's generally where you want to look if you have a corrupted rule set or Fantasy Grounds keeps crashing when you start. Or the other thing is extensions. If you ever have problems starting up and it just crashes or gives you errors, unload all your extensions first before you log into Fantasy Grounds and see if that fixes it before you panic. And if it does give you problems, then more than likely you have to find an updated version of your extension. So keep that in mind when you're having problems with Fantasy Grounds. First thing you want to think about is extensions. Usually they're written for the current version of Fantasy Grounds, but once Fantasy Grounds updates, it might break or change some things around, so you have to wait for the author to come up with a fix or a workaround, or maybe they'll abandon it altogether. So you got to be careful with extensions. They often cause problems, and they tend to break depending on what it does. So now this just confirms that I have all the core rules loaded. Once that's done, I can close this, and then I hit the next arrow on the right, and this takes me to the options. So when I click on options, it brings up the options window. I can close this campaign or click finish, and when I come to this session again, that little setup wizard won't come up anymore. But if you want it to come back, you can click on setup again, and you can go through it again if you need to. So now that you're at the options, you can decide what types of options you want to play with. I think initially you probably won't know what most of these things do, but there is something that's kind of cool, like this background logo. You can switch it on or off, or make a custom one. So a custom one would require that you have some content in your assets window. So if I come down to assets, basically these are the folders that contain tokens, portraits, maps, handouts, those sort of thing. Now the way that this is set up, I already have some stuff in my data folder. So I want to go to the images folder. It defaults to tokens. So you want to switch to images. And then I'm going to double click on the data folder. And I have a folder that I added manually, which is this FGC logos, which is actually the logos that we use for our community. So if I double click, it's going to give me a preview image. So I designed this image for the layout of it for this particular rule set, and also for this session. So then if you want to create an image record, that will send this over to your images, and it will pop up as an image asset, or you can set it as a background decal. So that's what I'm going to do. So I set it as the background decal, and now this is what will show when you load up your game. And if you move that file or rename it, it'll break that. So don't once you've put that in there, don't move it or rename it. Otherwise, you're going to have to reassociate it. So this is the logo decal, but you can put whatever you want. I suggest getting something that doesn't have a border, maybe something that like this, it doesn't have a hard line border on it if you can help it. It's nice to have one that's faded into the background. It's kind of cool. But anyway, so if you want to turn that on or off, you can turn that off in the decal area. So you can go back to default, you can turn on your own custom one, or you can just turn it off altogether. So that is just one cool thing about Fantasy Grounds. Another thing is if you start a new campaign and you want to send your players a message, there is, in this options area, there's message of the day. So this used to be a separate plugin. Now it's part of the interface. It used to be an extension. But basically you can write any text you want. So you can say like, welcome to my game. And what happens is when your players log into Fantasy Grounds into your table, as soon as they go to the characters and they select a character from the character bank, it will pop up and give them information. It could be instructions, it could be a welcome, it can be a recap from your last session. You can even link things in here, so you can drag and drop links from maps and those sort of things in here. So it's kind of a cool little add-on feature that comes with Fantasy Grounds, and you just have to populate or supply the content. So that is basically a cool little feature. Now the sidebar here on these patterns of backgrounds, links here, these are all things that lead to different data types within Fantasy Grounds. So if you want to change those or rearrange them or make them more unique, you click on sidebar in the options menu. And what happens is you have the ability to customize it. So you can clear all the sidebar ones. You can't clear the ones on the bottom or these ones in the top right corner, but you can clear all these little banners. So if I want to just see everything, I click on all, and that shows you all the different ability or all the different banners like notes, images, tables, story entries, so on and so forth. If you just want to be in Game Master mode, if you're already ready to go and play or run a game, you just click GM. That gives you all the buttons you need for Game Master mode. If you're just going to be a player and you're just playing, you click Play mode and you have even less options, but those are the ones that you mostly need. And then Create PC is when you're leveling up or building characters. So that's basically the different views. And then you can clear it and also bring them one at a time as to which ones you want. So you don't have to have the same groups all the time. So I'm just going to click on all just for the sake of it and close that. So we were in the options menu. So to get to the options, it's a gear cog in the top right. And when you click on it, that brings you to this options menu. So also in here, you have your currency. So if you wanted to add or use a different type of currency added to your campaign, you can. Just remember that a lot of content is usually priced in gold or whatever the main currency is. So you'd have to do a lot of conversion. The other thing is your party vision and movement. You can turn that on or off depending on how you want to use the line of sight and how you want to have your party view things. So you can have them view as a group or as individuals. That's basically what that does. And then you have some options for the combat tracker, which keeps track of everything, like your dice hit rolls and your saves and your turns and all those sort of things. So anyhow, but that's your options is basically things that you're going to have to learn as you go along and using Fantasy Grounds. And some people never even touch it. So it really depends on what your needs are. But it's hard to pinpoint, what exactly everything does because there's different rule sets and they have different options. So for me to go over all these would only pertain to mostly 5th edition. So if you use Pathfinder or one of the others, some of these may not apply. They might be different, or you might have ones that this rule set doesn't have. So each rule set has its own options depending on the rules. The token lights is a way to add custom lighting. So you can add this, and what it does is once you add your own custom light, when you come over to the effects button, you'll have more options instead of just a generic one. So maybe you might add unique spells lights for each spell type, and then it would be available as a preset after that so that you and your players will have access to those during gameplay. The other thing is to have your languages. So if you wanted to know how a language is spelled or what languages are available, you can click on languages. As the game master, you can make your own languages. And as a player, you can look at this for reference to see how it's spelled. Because when you put it on your character sheet, you have to spell the name of the language correctly, including the punctuation, like for capitals and such. So that is your languages. So I'll just break down some of the anatomy. So we have the combat tracker, which is probably one of the most important aspects of the game. The chat window is down here. This is where all the roles will be displayed. It is also customizable to the sizing of it. So if you right click and you unlock it, you can move the position of it. You can widen it. You can narrow it down. You can move it. Once you have it in place, though, and you like where it sits, then you can lock it. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to lock it. The dice can be changed color-wise. So if I come over to the colors, and you got this color selector here. So right now it's kind of this aquamarine blue, but if I wanted to use the blue from the background, I could, or this yellow. So if I click on this little bubble here, it gives me this color picking wheel, and that'll change the dice accordingly. Or you can use the eyedropper and hover over whatever color you want. So I might pick one of these and lighten it up a little bit and then hit OK. And then that changes the color based off the background color. You can also change the color of the text to either black or white. I think in the future they're going to have more options for this. For right now, that's what you have. I think they're looking into potentially having skin dice and such, but they have to make sure that the visibility is going to work with their animation and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit more things that have to be considered when doing that. So the other thing is, once you have the combat tracker up, you have a party sheet, which is mostly for the game master, but the party sheet is another nice tool. It gives you an overview of the party and all of their different assets. You have different tabs. So one for dealing with inventory. The main tab is the overview. The order tab is to keep track of who's in what watch order, and then you can have your marching and formation and use this as a kind of like a rough map if you don't have one. And then you have your XP area where you award the party for encounters and quest items, which are goals, or they're like landmarks, or even anything that is oriented to the overall story arc. So they could be milestones, whatever you want to call them. Those are what those are. And then encounters are for like combat or disarming traps and that sort of thing. So this just depends on your gameplay. But party sheet is very handy for the game master. Players can access inventory if you allow it as a game master, and they can also access the order sheet. But they cannot access the XP or the main tab, and that is done in the options. So if you go to the options, and if you want your players to have access to the inventory so they can manage, they can drag inventory back and forth from here and trade items and stuff, that would be turn on this party show characters to clients on, and party show inventory to clients. So if you have that on, they can access this sheet and they can access the order sheet. If you don't want them to have access to it, you turn those off. So that's what governs that. So the party sheet's a cool thing. And then when you have content, such as stuff in your library, I'm going to go to library. Now I loaded the basic core books earlier, so these are what's on your shelf basically. If you want to load more, you can click on modules. And let's say you wanted to add the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. So on the bottom left, I'm going to search for sword. And that will bring up anything with that name in it. So here's the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. So I'll click the Players module, which has all the character creation content. And then there's some DM lore and some things like that for the Forgotten Realms. So I would click that, and that loads all the Dungeon Master things that are needed that they need to know and look at. And then there's also a map section that will load all the maps that go with the book for the rule set and for the setting. So if I click load, that's going to add it to my shelf. So this is how you quickly load content If you have third-party content from the DM's Guild, you can also search and load that. So I want to load up Rob Tui's conditions and effects. So I'm going to just type COND for conditions. And here's the 5e conditions and effects. So I hit load. And the reason I like this module in particular is because it has all of, or most of, the conditions and effects set up for use. And it even has the instructions here. There's a reference manual that has a list of what things can be, how they're used and such. And then over here on the right is where they actually exist. So if I go back to the effects area, now all these custom effects that were from this module are loaded, and you can drag and drop these into the combat tracker as you need them. There's all kinds. There's for Bardic Inspiration. There's about 5 pages worth, depending on how far you have this stretched down. But these are all things that you can drag to the combat tracker if you need them. There are different types of adjustments, effects, conditions, and that. There are things that aren't covered in this list here for under the normal conditions. So if you needed Bardic Inspiration, you can drag and drop that on your character, and it's more of a reminder in that case. But then there's other ones that actually do things mathematically. So that's a nice module to have. That's on the DM's Guild. Okay, so that basically is your library. If you want to look at something like a book, I'm going to close the options for now. And I'm in the library view and close the party sheet too. So I'm in the library view and I want to go to the player's handbook. So each of the main books have a reference manual. So if I go to the player's handbook, here's a reference manual. Open that up. There's the reference manual itself. If I go to the character creation part of it, you come down here and you'll notice that there are some things in here that are basically for character creation. They left this alone so that you can interpret this how you want, but there is a specific order to create characters if you do the old drag and drop method. But if you use the new character wizard, you can pretty much follow this if you want. And that's what that does. So if you go to characters and you open up character wizard, you can follow this, and that's how they have it set up. Race, stats, class, that's basically how this is set up. It's a little bit different order, but it's pretty much the same thing. The character wizard allows you to make changes and adjustments at first level so that you're not committing to the changes as you go. It's like you basically set up everything initially and then you hit save, whereas before you were dragging and dropping, and each time you did that, you were committing to a change. So that's the difference between doing character creation manually or using the character wizard. So I'll show you a little bit of that later. And like I said, if you want to go through the reference manual, this is basically like the book. You have your direction arrows where you can switch pages. If you hit the up arrow, it'll take you to all the appendices. And if you want to search, let's say languages is something that you might want to look at. So if I type languages, hit enter. Here's an entry here for languages. You can pop this page out of the reference manual, and you can use this as a floating reference, or you can drag and drop, just left click, drag this little link, this little circle up here, or it could be a dragon head or a skull, and drag and drop it down to the hotkeys. The hotkeys are versatile. You have Control, Alt, Shift, and many variations of such. So if you hit the Shift key or the Control key, it switches between what's visible and what isn't. So you have like 96 different combinations. So that's basically one of the nice features in Fantasy Grounds, is to have this little drag and drop area. So if you have a spell that you constantly have problems, or if you have a table that you want to reference all the time, or some passage in the book that you want to reference, like for instance, like languages. So I don't have to dig all the way back into the library. I can just pop that page up and it's right there. So that's a handy little tool that this is available in most all the rule sets. So if you have a reference of something in a story entry, you can drag and drop it here. You can even put characters in there. You can have shortcuts to dice rolls and stuff. So there's all kinds of things you can do with that. So that's basically the some of the features. Now, when you start getting into Fantasy Grounds first time, it's going to be a little bit confusing because you're not going to know everything is. But just remember that most of the content is in the library. You have to have the content loaded first. Once it's loaded, and if it's an official product, it'll most likely have a reference manual, so you can go through and read if you need to, and you can bookmark things and you can shortcut them. And then your next thing is you can also come over here to the right and you can access some of the content. So if you look at, for instance, images, these are all the images that come from all the source books. And this is a group of different images. So if you click on group up here, you can select which book you want to look at instead of everything at once. So if I want to look at just the maps from one of the source books, like the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, the player's part of it, and then there's some backgrounds that you can look at. There's a city guard. So there's images from the actual book that you can share with your group, or you can access a player if it's shared to you. Here's the Sword Coast maps, and there's a cover here that has different things for depending on what you're going to be looking for or using. So this is just a quick thing to look at. This is just learning how to use the groups. So these are your filters. So when you're using content in Fantasy Grounds, this group is a filter. And if you have 50 books loaded and you only want to look at the stuff in the monster manual, then you select that. And that's how you filter out content so you don't get confused or overwhelmed. You leave it on all, you're going to look at everything at once. So that's something that you have to get used to, is filtering out what you want. So that's the same thing with tables. So if tables exist in 50 different products and you only want the tables from the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, then you would click on that. And these tables here happen to be backgrounds. So these are player backgrounds for the actual character creation. If you wanted to look at some tables from the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's some random treasure stuff. Here's, let's see, here's some treasure tables. So these are all the different treasure tables that Fantasy Grounds will pull upon when it needs to create or generate different treasure chests based off of these tables. So there's a lot of things that are grouped into chapters or into the book. So get used to using that filter feature in each group. So your items, you might have a group in here, you might have another group in another group area. So it just depends on which content you're trying to access. So just remember that each one of these is filterable, and then you can break those down as you need them, depending on what content you have and what you're going to run. So these are different things that we have loaded. And if you have everything loaded here in the library, and you click on one of these, like encounters, for instance, this is going to show all the encounters for every book. But if you just want to see the ones from the Sylvan Adventure encounters, then you would select that group. And here's a forest encounter, there's a displacer beast. So these are just different ways to use Fantasy Grounds to help you narrow down your content. Fantasy Grounds does allow a lot of drag and drop features. It's not very hard to create an encounter. So if you wanted to build a quick encounter before your game, you would select encounters. You could make your own group or category to be more organized. You don't have to, but it helps. So if you click on this green plus button, it's going to make a group called Group 1. I'm going to hit the edit button, which will allow me to edit the title. So I'm just going to say My Encounters, just for the heck of it. And then I'll click on Stop Editing. So now I have my own custom group. So when I select that, there's nothing in there yet because I have to create something. So I'm going to click on the green plus button in this menu on the bottom right, or you can right click and create an item. So that's another way to do it. So I'm going to click on the title here, and I'm just going to put My Encounter. And I'm just going to make a quick goblin encounter. So I'll say My Encounter, and then I'll say goblins, just so I remember what it is. And that's the header, and that's the title of the encounter. Now, once I've done, I can close the encounter window, and I have still have the encounter up. Now what I'm going to do is go to the NPCs, and I'm going to search for goblins. I spell it right. Okay, so here are goblins. So I want to grab a goblin and drag it over here from here to here. So I just drag over that little link, and then I might bring over a boss just for the heck of it. So I have the regular goblins and a boss. So now once I do that, I can close this and I can update the quantity. So let's say I want 3 goblins. So I just change that to 3. You can see there's 3 tokens now, and then the goblin. Now when you want to calculate the CR level and the experience, you just click on this little round swoosh thing, which is like an arrow chasing itself, and that sets it at a CR2 with an experience value of 350. And that comes right off the stat block from the actual NPC. So whatever their stat block says for the XP, it adds those together when you make your encounters. So if the XP is correct, this will be fairly accurate. So now that you have that, you can lock this, and this will be your new encounter. So let's say you don't like these little tokens, because these actually are just pogs. So if you have tokens of your own, you can actually replace those. So instead of replacing the tokens at the data level where the actual NPC stat block is, you can change the tokens at the encounter level so that you're not changing the base. You're only changing it for this encounter. So if I go to the assets area and I come up to the data area and I want to go to tokens first, and then I go to data if that's where they're stored. And then any of these areas, maybe you have your own, who knows, but I have a area called goblins, I believe. So here's goblin kin. So if I double click on that, this gives me my collection of goblins that I have. So if I want to change these out for different tokens, I can swap them. So for these regular goblins, I'm going to grab this guy that just has like this curved blade. So I'll drag and drop that on top of the existing token. And you also have to make sure the encounter is unlocked. If it's locked, you can't change it. And then I'm going to pick one of these others to be the captain. So I will say the one with the shield. Or I can say that, yeah, I'll just use the one with the shield and the blade here as the chief. So drag and drop that, and that replaces all the tokens. So that's just basically how quickly, I mean, it's not that bad. I even added extra steps in there. So it's actually very simple. So that's the encounter. Once the encounter is done, you can put it down in your taskbar if you want, or down in your hotkeys. You can link it to a map. So if you have a map that you want to use, let's see if I can find a halfway decent map. So here's some Sword Coast maps. Let's see. Where are those? So here are the maps, D&D Sword Coast. So here's a map of, let's see if I can find one that's actually a dungeon. Because these are basically city maps, so these wouldn't really be very helpful. However, you could pin this encounter, like let's say it's on this road here. You can actually pin this encounter by linking it to here. And then when the players get to that point in the map, you can open up that encounter and click on this down arrow, and then that will actually place the combatants on the encounter tracker, on the combat tracker, so that they're ready to go. So when you're ready to run this battle, you just click the down arrow. It adds them. They're automatically hidden by default, so they don't see it on the combat tracker. And if you had them arranged on a battle map, you could also do it there. So I will look for a map, actually. So Fantasy Grounds comes with some basic maps. So if you want to take a look at some of the things that come with Fantasy Grounds, there is a group here that has maps. If you load the SRD or some of the basic rules, you'll get some basic maps to work with. So it just depends on what content you have loaded. But basically, you can load up maps if you have them, or you can create your own. So if I wanted to create a quick map for this, I could do that. It would be in the tools under the images section. So I could create my own map if I had to. So let me see. I'm going to make my own group first, which is a good habit to get into. And I'm going to hit edit. I go ahead and put my maps here so I know where they're at and they're not mixed in with everything else. So there's my new group called My Maps. And I'm going to select it. So I don't have anything there yet. I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus button. Right now it's just blank. There's nothing there. So I'm going to find some tiles to go with this area. So I'm going to go to the tools up here in the images and maps area here in this blank map. And I'm just going to say map, comma, I'll say Goblin Patrol. Or Goblin, Goblin Patrol, that's fine. And then over here, I might just say, Forest Encounter. Just maybe I'll just say the road, something like that. So if I click on this ID, what'll happen is when I share this image to the players, which is done by right-clicking on the top left corner and click Sharing, and then Share Record. And that will share it to your players. But what happens is if I have that unidentified, they only see the road. They don't see the title. And then that would be what they, basically what the image, when it's shared to them, that's what they'll see is this road instead of the whole description. You don't want them to see the Goblin Patrol, then they'll know what it is. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to the Layers tab, and I'm going to find some tiles in my library assets. So if I go to Assets, and go to Images. Now this is assuming you have content or you're subscribed to the art subscription on Fantasy Grounds. I think it's like $50 a year. It's worth it. So I'm going to type in FG with a space after it and hit enter. And what that'll do is narrow down to the Fantasy Grounds art packs. Each art pack is a little different. Here's a forest one for decorations. There's a swamp. There's some effects. There's maps that are created for Fantasy Grounds. So these are different art packs. So there's a cemetery, forest, swamp. So let's go with the swamp. So I'm going to double click on the bag, and that will bring me to this folder here. So this basically gives me some content to work with. So here's a swamp bank, for instance. So if I want to use the swamp bank, which is one of the assets in this pack, I can drag and drop this into the tile area. So I'm in the layers section, and this is the tile area. So I want to see what else we have in here. So if I stretch this out a little bit more and use the arrow key to navigate, I can come through here and see what's all in this pack. So there's a couple land features, and then there's some assets. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this swamp bank, which is like the main piece here. So I'll drag and drop that into the tile area. So this is a 4x4 tile. Now it doesn't know what 4x4 is because I haven't set the actual grid. So I want to set the grid, and I'm going to set the size to 60x60, or you can go 50x50. It's up to you. I'll leave it at default 50x50. Once you do that and you turn on the grid itself, the visibility will come on once you place a tile, but that's basically the first thing you want to do is set the grid. And now when I use the tiles, grab this over, now it will let me know that this tile is 4x4. So if I click on the map somewhere or anywhere on here, there is the actual image. It says it's 4x4. So it's basically 4 squares by 4 squares. As you can see, it's not lined up with anything yet. So that's why I want to get this one in line first before I do anything else. So I should have had the grid on first and then did this, but it's okay. So now what I'm going to do is go to the selection tool, the layer, and just click until it lines up. Now, if I wanted to use multiple instances of this, I could basically stamp a bunch of them first and then arrange how I want them. But in this case, I'm going to actually grab one of these the swamp bank over here, So I'm going to drag and drop this other asset into this area of the tile. And then it's also 4x4. So if I want to flip it around or anything, this would be the time to do it. But I'm okay with it now. So I'm just going to click on the map where I basically about where I want it. And that's basically how you can place your assets as you need. And then if you wanted to rotate it at this point, you need to go back to the selection, the layer selection, and make sure you have this layer selected. And then you can flip this around if you need to. So I'll just leave it like that. And then if you want to use some of the other assets, you can do so. So maybe I want this one instead. So I'll go ahead and drag and drop this over here. And then I'm going to take it and click away somewhere, maybe over here. But see, it's facing the wrong way. So I want to flip it. So I'm going to flip this over this way. Now this says it's 12 by 10. So this is going to be a really big piece. So I'm going to click over here. So that's a really big area. So I'm going to go ahead and click the selection tool, and then I'm going to drag this piece over here and butt it up with the rest. So you can do all kinds of cool things, and then if you want to, you can grab some of these other assets and layer it on top so it looks like you have more of a full map. So I'm going to grab this other tile and do the same thing, stick it in the tile area. It's 4x4, so it should fit in this little pocket. And there we go. So this is just a way to quickly build something that you can use for your games. It takes a little time. I'm not saying you're going to do it in 5 seconds, but once you get used to how to manipulate the map tools and stuff, it gets a little easier. So we'll just say that's our map for now. So that's basically what we're going to do. And then I'm going to grab some of these mushrooms. So right now I have the tile still. And if I wanted to put another one down, I can. So let me do that. So I'll put one more tile. And that will be there. And then I'm going to add, you can kind of make this more of an end if you want, but I'm just going to use this little pathway here as for the ambush. And if you want to use any of the other assets, you just drag and drop those over. So I want to use some of these swamp decorations. So like here's some plants. So I'm going to drag and drop and put that in there. Now this is a 6x4, so it's pretty big, pretty good sized tile. So I want to go ahead and just click somewhere on the map. Okay, so I get an idea what it looks like. I'll take the selection tool, make sure I have that layer selected, and then I'm just going to drag and drop it somewhere on the map. So it gives the map a little bit more flavor, and then I'm going to turn down the transparency. So I'm just going to go to the color picker, the tint, and I'm going to make sure that you have this selected, which I do, the decoration, and then I'm going to go ahead and change the alpha, as you can fade it in and out. So I'm just going to put a little teeny bit of fade on it so it blends in a little bit better. And I'm going to hit OK, but you can recolor it at this point if you want. And I hit OK. So this is just how you would layer this. So when you're all done with this encounter map, then what you'll do is take each one of these assets and lock them if you don't want them to move or anything like that. And I'm going to make a folder. And I'm going to call this Swamp Encounter, because I don't really have a good name for it right now. So here's the Swamp Encounter. And this is just a folder to put everything in. So I'm going to drag and drop each one of these pieces into the folder so that when we use this encounter, it's organized and it's all basically sitting right there. And as you notice, the bushes, they left because they're on the bottom. They're underneath the tile. So I got to take the decoration and put it on top. So that way that layer shows on top of the others. Then once I'm done, if you unlock these and select just the folder, you can move this whole thing as one piece. So you don't have to drag each individual piece. You can drag these where you want them. So that's basically where I'm going to have this, and they're all lined up on the grid, so that's good. And as you see it's all squared away. So this is a way that you can build modular pieces and put them together as you need it. So it's kind of a cool feature. I'm going to add one more asset, these little mushrooms. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I put little mushrooms here out on the end. So if I drag and drop this tile into the tile area, it's 2 by 2, so it's going to take up quite a bit of an area. So I'm going to change it to 1 by 1 because I just want it to be one square. I don't want it to take up that much room. And then if you want to flip it around, so I might flip it like that. And now I'm going to click, and it's only going to basically be in this area. And if it's still a little too big for you, you can actually go to the selection tool, and you're going to click on the mushroom decoration layer, and you're going to hold down the control key and click on the actual asset. And let's see. So you can move it and make sure I'm selecting it. Yep, so here's the selection tool. So you can scale this by dragging. You can hold on to the control key, or the shift key will keep basically the scale. And I go down a little bit. So that's basically what I want. And I'm going to drag it over here. And if you don't want it to snap to grid and you want to center it yourself, turn off the snap to grid and just drag it where you want it so it doesn't interfere with you. And then you can turn it back on. So that way you can have a little bit more freedom. So that was just adding a little bit of mushrooms there. So that's that. And then I'm going to add a little mist because I want it to be kind of spooky, I guess. So if I go to the effects button down at the bottom, I'm going to add some mist. I'm going to go ahead and lock this because that's where I want it to be. I'm going to click the effects layer, and then I come up to the top and select the effects option and use a drop down, and I'm going to use mist. And as you can see, it's going kind of fast. It's not really what I want. So I'm going to turn down the amount a little bit, and if you go to the very center, about 50, that's when it slows down. So it kind of slowed that down a little bit. So I'm going to go down to like 50. If you go over one way or left or right, that's the direction it changes it. So 50 is like neutral, or it barely moves. So there's 52. That's pretty good. And then what you want to do is put a mask on, because you don't want this entire area to have mist, just this area. So then I'm going to blur it to kind of blend it in with the background. And then I will reveal just the area that I want to have mist. So that'll just be this square. So that'll be this area. And that's the only area that needs to have that mist. Everything else doesn't need it. There we go. So that's the mist that we're using for this particular encounter. Kind of make things a little spookier. And then I'm going to turn it down just a hair. It's not overwhelming. So maybe about 30%. It's pretty good. So these are just some of the things you can do with Fantasy Grounds. So this is just a rough idea. So once you have that in place, then what you can do is, once you have the map set up, you can take your encounter and you can link it to this image. And once you've done that, then you can lay out your goblins. So if you want to. So if I'm going to take these goblins, I'm going to individually place them on the map as encounters. And these are where they're going to appear on the map once the encounter is sprung. So I'll just set these out here like this, and then I'm going to put the goblin boss here, and that should be it. And now that I have them placed, once I close this, they'll disappear because they're basically set for this encounter. But these are basically, I'm holding down the control key and scaling these up because they're a little bit small for 5 feet. So I think that's a pretty good size for them, right about there. And then the goblin, I'll make him just the boss, I'll make him just a touch bigger. There we go. So that's basically the encounter. And then once I'm done, I click the close this, and that gets rid of them off the map until I reveal them. So if I reveal these goblins, they'll appear on the map once I've had them placed. So if I I'm going to clear out all the goblins and by deleting them. And now if I bring up that encounter, they're already placed, so I hit the down arrow. Now they're all attached to the encounter, and they're on the map ready to go. So if anyone comes through here, I can start revealing them as needed. So they're not visible to the party yet. So this is just some of the things you can do, and this is all homebrew. There's no module here. I'm just throwing this together. So then if you want players, you can build or create characters with the character wizard, or you can manually build one with the drag and drop features. Or if you have character sheets already, you can import. So I'm going to import a character to make this quicker. So I click the import character, and what it'll do is it'll go into your campaigns if you have any previous ones. It'll display all the characters that you have in different campaigns, and you'll be able to pull them in from there. It's important to name your characters so you know which campaigns they're in. So you might want to put a note on them or something like that, so that when you do look at them through here, you're able to tell which one is which. I know that's been a problem, as a lot of people don't know which version or which variation that they've been looked at. So here is some characters that have already been built, obviously. I'm going to grab in this paladin, I guess, is a specific build here. So if I click the little plus button, it's going to add it to the campaign. And then I'm going to hit the arrow to go back to character selection. And there's the character that I picked. So if I double click on this, whoever is connected to your table, they will have possession. And then I will drag this over to the combat tracker. And basically now it's part of this campaign. And then if I go back to my images and maps, I can put this character on the sheet or on the map. So if I drag and drop his token on here, now he's on the encounter map. So that's basically how you would set up an encounter. You put all your NPCs and your players on here, and you reveal the goblins as you need to in this encounter. Maybe they're hidden behind bushes, who knows, but basically they're not visible yet until I make them visible as the game master. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. So we showed you how to load up stuff from the library, that sort of thing. This is kind of how you would just kind of go about just randomly running things, without even a module. I just threw together this little map and then add this little encounter myself and throw some effects on the map and call it good. But if you want all the fancy line of sight, you're going to take a little bit longer to put terrain and stuff on this, and maybe put terrain on these bushes so you can hide behind them. That'd be something that you could do. So if you wanted to use the bushes for the ambush, no pun intended, you could go to line of sight, and you would go to the terrain tool, and then I would select something else. So the line of sight will be attached to nothing at this point. It'll be separate. And then I'm just going to go to the line tool and just click around here and make a little bit of terrain around these bushes so that when the players come across this area, the goblins have somewhere to hide. So that's what that's all about. So there's the line of sight thing there. And then once I go to play mode, and if I turn on enable the line of sight, this is what you're going to see. Obviously, these goblins, when you have a goblin selected, they can see a lot better than this, whatever this is. So let's see, what is he? Oh, he's an Azamar, so he has dark vision, I believe. Yeah, he has dark vision. So that basically would take care of that part of it. And then if you have the lighting on, this is basically when you take possession of the Azamar, that's what he sees. And then as the game master, I can move these tokens over so that they are not visible to his naked eye. And then I would probably take the goblins and move them accordingly. That way you can change how this plays out. So if you're this character and you select this token, the only goblin you're going to see is this one here, and he's kind of obscured by the bushes. So that's how this line of sight would work in this case. And then you could put borders on here if you wanted to, but this is just a way to show this. So you want to take off the player view like that. That's the game master view. So you can hit Control P to see what the player sees temporarily, so you can adjudicate what's going on. But there you go. So that then when you're done with that, you lock all your layers so they don't move on you. And this layer here is line of sight, so I'm going to go ahead and call it that, so I remember what it is. And then the mist is just what it is, so I'll leave that as it is. So you have this encounter with this map area, this folder, and then you have the mist on its own layer, and then you have line of sight on its own layer. So it's just kind of up to you. You can also change this god-awful gray grid. So if you go back to the grid, I want to have more of a themed color. So I want to click on the tint, and I'm going to click on the like a light green color, and then I'm going to fade it out a little bit so it's not so obnoxious, and hit OK. So that's a lot better looking on the eyes. So it kind of blends in a little bit, but you can still see it. So that's just a tip there. So lock the map, ready to go. Then I can drag this down to the hotkeys. So when I'm ready to run this and I come back to Fantasy Grounds, all I have to do is click on that image and it's ready to go. And then my character sheet, I'll have that right here, stretch it out so I can see everything if I was the player. And then I'd go to the Actions tab so I can have all my abilities and weapons here. So these are just things that you can do to kind of make things easier on you. And then say my initiative roll is here. I can double click on it. Fantasy Grounds will record that for me. And then if I want to shortcut the initiative, I can drag and drop it down to the dice, to the hotkeys, and just single click it instead of double clicking, and that will re-roll it. So there's lots of things you can do to make this tool work for you. You gotta work the tool. Don't let the tool work you. So control the game. Don't let it control you. And it just takes a while to get used to this. So it's not going to be overnight to get so efficient with it that you can just whip through it. It's going to take a little time. So hopefully this helps give you an idea anyway. So take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. I hope that you guys can use Fantasy Grounds as your go-to Fantasy Grounds or your tabletop RPG or your virtual tabletop of choice. I think it's a good tool. It does have some strengths and weaknesses, but it's definitely worth your time. So anyhow, take care, everybody. Have a good day, and I'll